Lesson 132, Working with Data. Today we come to a new unit, Unit 11, on the application of statistics and graphing. And Lesson 132 is really just an introductory lesson. We're going to go over some important terms. We're going to be looking at some different graphs, some different considerations that you will have to have, both for Lesson 132 and then also for the rest of the unit. So make sure that you are paying close attention to the video so that you know everything you need to know. So first of all, whenever we talk about graphing, we need to start with data. And data is really the term for facts and info about a specific topic. So anytime you have some information or some facts about a topic, especially with numbers involved, that is known as data, and it can be on really anything. The population of a country, how much money a business has been making, maybe a percentage of people who hold a specific opinion. It can be about really anything. And data is collected in two main ways. The first way is by a survey. And a survey is just a series of questions that you would ask to people. And I actually gave you a survey, I think it was last week, a little how's it going survey. And you had to answer questions like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you liking learning from home? Or about how long does it take you to complete your daily checklist. And then I looked at the data that I got from that survey, and then I could see how you were doing. I could see how long it's taking you to do your daily checklist, to see if I should increase the workload or if I should decrease the workload. So that's what I use that data for. Another way that data can be collected, though, is through research and experiments. So not asking people questions. It would be if somebody were to perform a scientific experiment of some kind, maybe perform it multiple times, record their results. Their results would be the data that they would be looking at. So we're going to focus mostly on surveys for today, and there are some things we need to pay attention to for surveys. So first of all, if you are not surveying or asking questions to a whole population or a whole group of people, you have to take a random sample. So let's break that down a bit. If you were to survey, for instance, the grade 6B class, you could ask all of them a series of questions. It would not be hard to do. It would not be hard to gather that information. There are only 28 members of the class. You can ask 28 people a question or multiple questions, no problem. If you want to survey larger groups or larger populations, it gets a little bit trickier. You can think about, for instance, let's say somebody wanted to know the opinions of Canadians in general on something. Well, there are millions and millions of people who live in Canada. You cannot just go and ask every single one of them questions. So if your grouping is larger, you may want to take a sample of that population. So I have an example here. Let's say you wanted to survey the whole school. So instead of a group of 28 people in one class, you want to ask 650 people their opinion on something. Well, it's a little bit harder to get 650 people's opinions. So you could do is only survey some of the students, which would be known as a sample. Okay, so you're just surveying some of the students. And then if you look at the data that you gather from that sample, it should represent the group. But there are a couple things you have to keep in mind. You have to keep in mind that the sample has to be large enough. So for instance, let's say you wanted to know the favorite sport at Heritage. You wouldn't just go to one Heritage student and ask that one student what their opinion is on their favorite sport. Maybe that one person said their favorite sport was volleyball. You can't just look at that data and say, well, that one student I asked, their favorite was volleyball. Therefore, all 650 students at Heritage have the favorite sport of volleyball. That would be completely inaccurate. You have to take a larger sample of the group. All right, so the sample has to be large enough. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is that the sample has to be random. So let's keep with the favorite sport idea. If you were to take a larger sample of students, but you went and you only asked members of the soccer teams what their favorite sport was, well, that also would be inaccurate data because you can bet that people who are on soccer teams really like playing soccer. So if you're only asking soccer players what their favorite sport is, it's likely that lots of them will think soccer is their favorite sport, which maybe is not accurate of the whole student population. So just a couple of things to keep in mind. You have to make sure that your data is accurate if you're taking a sample of a population. Now let's do an example. So for this example, we're going to take a survey of the grade 6B class, which has 28 students total. And since we are surveying the whole population, we don't have to worry about our sample being large enough or our sample being random, because we're not taking a sample, right? We're surveying the whole population of grade 6B. And let's say you went around and you asked all of the students, including yourself, about their favorite ice cream flavor from these 3 options, and here are your results. 14 people said chocolate was the best, 7 people said vanilla, and 7 people said strawberry. That is your data, that is your information. Your next step would be to take that information and organize it into a table. And a table is just a chart that shows the specific number values that you found. Okay, so instead of a tally chart, you've moved into numbers. So 14 people preferred chocolate, 7 vanilla, 7 strawberry. So just a quick glance, you can see what your data is telling you. And then once you have it into a table, the next step is to put your data into a graph, which is just a visual representation of that data, okay? And there are 3 main types of graphs that we are going to look at: a bar graph, a circle graph, also known as a pie graph, and a line graph. And you use these graphs depending on the type of data that you have. Okay, so anytime you are comparing things, you can use a bar graph, and we'll look at specific examples in a minute. Anytime you're looking at parts of a whole, you are going to use a circle graph. Anytime you are looking at changes over time, you are going to use a line graph. So if we think to our survey of ice cream, we are not looking at changes over time, right? It's not like your opinion about your ice cream flavor is going to change from month to month. You probably have a specific favorite and you keep that favorite. Okay, so we're not going to use a line graph. We are actually going to use a circle graph, because what you are doing with that survey is you're taking the whole grade 6 class and you're looking at the parts of it that prefer certain flavors. Okay, so you're going to use a circle graph. You could use a bar graph, but in this case, a circle graph is a better option because we're looking at parts of a whole. So you would make a graph that looks something like this. And in a future lesson, we're going to look more specifically in how to do this. But the reason I wanted to show you this is to see why we would use a circle graph. So the circle, or the whole pie, represents the whole class. And then you can easily see for chocolate, we had 14 out of 28 students preferred chocolate. That is equivalent to 50%, or 1/2 of the graph. So then you can really just take a quick glance and see, wow, half the class prefers chocolate. Okay, half the class out of the total 100% of the class. Then for bar graphs, you'll use bar graphs anytime you are making comparisons. So here's an example of a bar graph that compares the number of days that it snowed in certain months in whatever location this is. It doesn't give us that information. So you can see we're comparing December, January, February, and March, comparing the months, and then it also lets us know how many days of snow were in each month. So in December there were 2, January there were 6, etc. So making a comparison. Now line graphs have to do with changes over time. So here we have an example of muffins being sold. So somebody was selling muffins. They started on Monday, and then they're tracking how many muffins they sold over time. So on Monday they only sold 5, but by Saturday, it looks like they made it up to 14 muffins sold on that day. Okay, so changes over time, starting on Monday, moving to Saturday. So anytime you see times down below, that's a clue. It should be a line graph. And then one more thing about line graphs is that you can have multiple comparisons at the same time, and you'll see that in your lesson today for lesson 132. So here's product trends by month. So here's probably an electronics store, and they're tracking how much they have sold of each individual product. So it looks like in January, desktops were pretty popular, desktop computers, but their popularity dropped over time. Whereas for laptops and tablets especially, the popularity increased, or the amount purchased increased. Okay, so once again, changes over time for line graphs. So there you have it. Those are the 3 types of line graphs. Keep this in mind. It's also on page 284. You'll see something similar with the different types of data and the different types of graphs. And then the last thing that I should say to you is for answering these questions, a lot of the answers are going to involve words and writing out sentences and things. When you check over your answers tomorrow, don't be concerned if your wording is not exactly the same as mine. As long as you have, in general, the right idea, you can count it right in your mind. Okay, so don't get too caught up in the exact wording. Just make sure that your wording represents your idea well for answering the question. And that's all there is to it.